What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PT Coffee Cast, brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
We're doing good, man. How about you?
Yeah, not bad. Today's been a good day. Started off with a little run. Did some client work. Typed some emails up. Had a little lunch with the team, and now we're here.
Here we are. It's been a good day.
I know it's going to be a good episode when you bust out your dinosaur hat.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, that is the dad hat. Like, I don't know if there is a more dad hat than that.
I love it, man. It really, just kind of gets me in the zone. Think like a dinosaur, be like a dinosaur.
Yeah. We're going to move on quickly from this intro because this guy's struggling. Take a sip of coffee, bro.
Okay.
Reset. This guy.
You know what the problem is? I had a Red Bull today.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie.
When?
You don't need to know.
That makes me nervous.
I know.
Will has come from a struggle with an energy drink addiction. This explains a lot, actually.
Yeah, it does. It's like the root of it all.
Yeah. But we're super excited to be back, guys, with another episode. We are going to be chatting a little bit about why empowerment takes time. And, Will brought this topic up before we jumped into this podcast. And as he always does, he has much better thoughts than I do. And I was like, ooh, this is a good episode for the podcast, because obviously empowerment is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot in the health space, physio space. It's something that like we really value. It's part of our mission of helping people take control of their health. So like it's a good piece of conversation. However, I think there are certain aspects of it that take time and that maybe aren't done as well, and maybe we think we're empowering people, but are we actually empowering people? And part of our conversation today is just around this idea of why we think it does take time, and some of those aspects. So I'm excited to dive into that a little bit. So maybe I'll pass it over to you and kind of have you lay the groundwork, and then we'll dive in.
Sure, and to be fair, the reason I started thinking about this more was Jared Hall made a post about like this kind of topic about seeing people more frequently and for longer and that type of thing, and it stimulated a lot of good conversation in the comment section I saw. So that's where I got it. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because I didn't invent this topic.
Yeah, shout out Jared Hall, former PT Coffee Cast guest, like way back in the early days. Like you're gonna have to scroll way back. But yeah, I've learned a lot from Jared, so that's cool. I didn't realize that's where you got it from.
Yeah, he just stimulates a lot of good conversation. Tries to kind of challenge different thoughts, which I think is cool. But basically, the idea is like about maybe for what we're going to talk about. It's this idea that a lot of people feel like because in their mind, they want to empower people. So what they interpret that as is seeing clients less frequently. And I think there's a case to be made that that could actually be not beneficial for a lot of clients depending on where they're at. So that's sort of the basis of the conversation.
Yeah, and I think the first little point on our whiteboard here is like the importance of having more frequency maybe early on. And you had mentioned like around this idea of like helping them learn or build the skills that are necessary to help build that empowerment. So is there certain like experiences that you've had where you've seen like, oh, okay, I need a little bit more time here to build these skills so that this person can be empowered?
Yeah, well, I would say I went through, and I think probably you did too, not to put words in your mouth, but when I first got out, I was like very much I wanted to empower people, which is, I think, a great place to sort of start from. But what I realized was if I didn't see people very frequently, and I'm talking like if I saw them every other week, you know, what would often happen is like there's a good chance that they'd have a flare up or something like that during that time period. And then they wouldn't have my guidance throughout that. And then they come back in 2 weeks, and it's sort of like hard to take much from that. And often I would just lose the client entirely. So I think that's where I started to realize and have a bit of a paradigm shift where I'm like, oh, I actually probably should be seeing these people more frequently, at least for a little while, to help foster the skills needed to navigate that.
Right, because it's almost like if you're not teaching them enough or they're not understanding enough how to manage it on their own, it's like, and you're trying to give them the opportunity to feel empowered, they have a little bit, but they don't have all the tools to be able to do that. And then that often probably makes them feel like, oh, maybe this isn't the right thing for me, or I can't control this, or, you know, maybe I'll go somewhere else. Whereas if you're like building those skills enough and they're understanding it and they're truly able to be empowered, then they won't feel that way in between like a session, essentially.
Totally. And it's also for us too, because like, you know, I think that to some cases we've got going on right now where we are, you know, just kind of starting, and it takes a bit to figure out the person and how they need to navigate things, especially if like there's added complexities of maybe like they do CrossFit or something like that, which is just inherently like a challenging thing to get people back to because there's so much variability built in.
Right.
And so like if someone's having a flare up and like we need to quickly talk about it and what's going on so that we can adjust and, you know, and figure out what works for this person to kind of gauge whether something's appropriate or not, you know. And if I see them 2 weeks later, it's like all that data was just not useful because it happened too long ago and they don't remember, or the memory's skewed, you know what I mean? And so you want to see them early and often so that like you can learn from those lessons quick and help them build confidence. Because if you go too long and they come back and they're like, you know, this, I was having so much pain and, you know, I didn't know what to do. And then now we don't really know what to do either. It's like how much confidence and how much trust is being built.
Mm. Yeah. And I think early on, more touch points to build that trust is super important. And I think you're trying to figure them out as a individual and like how they operate, how do they respond to flare-ups, how do they even just navigate the world, what are their values, how are they viewing these things. But at the same time, they're also feeling you out and trying to think like, can I trust this person? And like, is this information that they're giving me going to be helpful? And, you know, I've seen another practitioner before and it didn't work, so I'm not maybe as trustworthy of this situation. They need more time. And I think having those more frequent touch points with your client allows for that to build, which can then eventually down the line lead you to like allowing them to actually be empowered and go off and have more time between sessions.
Yeah, I think that's the main point there is like to empower, you have to help build the skills.
Right. And that's part of like
there's a building process,
adopting a coaching mindset and helping them build those things versus like, oh, I'm helping them be empowered by identifying this is the issue, giving them a bunch of exercises to do and then saying, hey, go do these on your own and like implement them on your own type thing. That's not really empowering people necessarily.
Totally. It'd be like teaching someone how to throw a baseball and you go, okay, here's how you throw it. We'll see you in a month.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah.
And you're like, okay, versus here's what we're going to do. We got a drill. Let's work on it for a week or a few days or whatever. Then let's check in with it and see how it went on your own. Try to progress things, right? Like that you're going to have to do that for a bit until they get the basics down, and then you can layer on some things, more spaced out.
Yeah. And I think a big component of this is shifting this idea in clients' mind that like coming to see us is like as bad, or as like, oh, I'm coming because I'm injured, this is like a negative thing, like help me improve this, versus like coming in and viewing it as an opportunity to build those skills. And like we as clinicians need to provide that opportunity for them as, hey, this is an opportunity for us to help educate you and build skills so that you can continue to apply these to your day to day. And there's value in that. And if that mindset gets shifted, people are more up to be like, oh, I do want to come in more frequently, or, oh, this is actually like a quote unquote good thing, even though I'm still in pain. We're building on that skill set to eventually get me to the point where that's not needed, or I'm feeling empowered to do things on my own. Because I think people still have this like view of like it's like a bad thing to come into physio because like they're injured. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like more frequent sessions or maybe a longer time seeing someone is not inherently unethical.
Right.
Right? It's only unethical if your entire goal is to develop dependency.
Right.
Right? That's not what we're trying to promote. Right? And I think people get that. Like, as long as your goal is to help foster, new skills and things that they can implement on their own, or just becoming healthier in general, like that's okay. It's okay to see them more frequently, or it's okay to continue to see them.
Right. And then not basing your worth as like a clinician on the number of times that you're seeing someone. Like you're not bad if you see someone more, like, you have to see them more frequently, or you're not this superstar if you've seen someone one time. That's not what the value should be placed on. The value should be what skills and what are you providing that client so that they can eventually get to being empowered, which may mean 3 sessions, may mean 20 sessions. And I think, like, I know for myself, it's like, we always talk about like a PVA or a patient, how many times is this client coming in? And I think it's very important that we understand what these things are and all that, and have this to like track data. And there's value to this. We do it here. But I think like the value shouldn't always be placed on the number of sessions or touch points you're having with the client, and your worth as a clinician is not dictated based off that. Your worth as a clinician is based off how well you're helping your clients get these outcomes. Now you have to figure out how you identify if they've gotten these outcomes, but that should be more of what the worth is placed on as a clinician versus like the frequency.
Yeah. And like those PVA things probably only really matter at the extremes. If your PVA is 2, there's something going on. Right? If your PVA is 40, like there's probably something going on.
You might want to look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should be somewhere in the realm of like, 5 to 15 or something like that.
100, 150.
Yeah. But yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. The other thing, I wanted to ask you about, and I think is good to talk about, is just like what maybe might be indicating that someone is built the skills and built the understanding and are ready to be like empowered or navigate these things on their own. As a clinician too, like, are there things you're picking up on where you're like, I'm going to challenge this person a little bit by giving them a little bit more freedom, or maybe not necessarily having like as close together of a touch point, because I want to see if they can implement what we've been working on.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously going to vary depending on the person and what they're working on and what their goals are and all that. But generally, you want to see that they are, verbalizing, they're communicating to you how they navigated things on their own successfully between your sessions. Mm-hmm. So like, someone has a flare-up, they tell you they were able to successfully calm down their symptoms, and then they have a thought process about things that you've talked about how they're going to make that adjust their next workout. So they're showing signs of like actually implementing and understanding, like they're comprehending what you've been telling them. So as long as you're aware of what lessons you've been going throughout the process, and you're seeing signs of them doing that on their own, I think it's time to try, if that's your goal, if your goal is to see them less often, have them work on their own, right? Versus like working on different issues or whatever, right? Then that probably indicates, okay, let's try going a couple weeks out, see what happens, right? And just reinforcing those lessons or whatever that you're going through.
Yeah, and I think it's oftentimes it should be them verbalizing it to you. Like, maybe you're asking questions to explore whether or not like they're picking up on those things, but it should be them verbalizing it to you and you not like telling them, unless sometimes what I find is like they will actually show me signs of understanding and empowering, and I'm just connecting the dots for them. And I'll usually do it by asking like a question versus telling them, but sometimes they'll show these signs and I'll try to question them to connect the dots to realizing that, hey, like you can manage this flare up on your own. Or when another thing I often like makes me super pumped and like is a sign that I think they're getting closer to like kind of doing their own thing, if that's what they want, is when they're talking about progressing themselves. Like sometimes they'll come and be like, I know we didn't talk about doing this, but like I was feeling this way and I was thinking like, maybe I'll try to add a little bit more load, or I tried to like do this a little bit faster, or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, that's hype. Like, what made you feel like you were ready to do that? And then they start to list off like a couple things that makes sense clinically, and they're doing that on their own. Like that to me is another indication of like, okay, this client is understanding the things that we're talking about, and they're at a point where, hey, if your goal is to get back to this and you don't want my guidance any further than that, then let's test this out a little bit. Like, let's take a little bit of time in between our session or whatever it may be. Like, I think those are good indications of that.
Yeah, it's a good point. It doesn't always have to be like a verbal. They might not explain it in the same scientific way as you do even, but I think the important thing is that you're using those kind of measures and signs and then letting that dictate, how frequently you should see each other, right, versus just going, oh, we're at the third session bi-weekly.
Right.
It should be, it might be session 2 for someone else, and it might be session 8 for another person.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And then I know I feel like I just have to say this. I know I would hope that people assume this, but like objectively, we're making decisions clinically as well as like, we're not just going to let this person just because they're like, oh, I'm feeling empowered, I'm going to go and, start doing 325-pound back squat. We're objectively guiding them as well in the decision-making process. That's always going to be part of what we're doing. And I think a lot of what we try to do is tie that into the client's understanding so that they understand like objectively as well. Like, hey, maybe you're feeling like you're ready to go and run, but you're still having trouble doing a single leg pogo hop, right? Like, so
Yeah.
Those things are still included as well. We're not just like letting people go off because they're feeling like they're at that point. If they're not ready, we're not.
No, like in certain cases, it more probably just means like, oh, this is prognostically like heading in the right direction. But like if you have an ACL, like someone who just got an ACL reconstruction, like it's good that they're learning these principles and stuff. That's great, but you probably still need to see them more frequently for a while anyway. Yeah, that's a good point. You got to obviously pair that with your clinical findings and what they need, and oftentimes that kind of thing is seeing them more frequently.
Right. Yeah, and I think that is tied into like empowerment of the client, right?
Yeah, you're not trying to empower them to just be a physio.
Yeah.
It's like they're only going to learn so much,
Yeah.
About the specific clinical stuff, like where you're going to be the one that needs to help them with that, right? This is different than having them learn like general principles for like navigating things, throughout the week and whatnot.
Right. Which like most clients are very capable of that, and often like a lot of times are doing the right things, a lot of the right things, with just like little tweaks that we need to make along the way. Anything else on that?
No, I think that pretty much covered it all.
Yeah, that was good. I'm glad that you took that extra sip of coffee. I think you really pulled it together.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
That's all we got for today, guys. Before we wrap up, make sure you are following us over on Instagram at PT Coffee Cast. We're putting out a bunch of content there, as well as subscribing to the podcast on your podcast platform, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you're consuming it. If you guys want to reach us, you can DM us or you can email us at podcast@themovementphysio.ca. And then lastly, we have some free content for you guys available in the show notes of this episode, as well as the link in our bio. We have our 3Y ebook, and we have our sales tips to help client outcomes. And hopefully sooner than later, we'll have some other sweet stuff for you guys to consume. But for now, that's all we got. As always, stay caffeinated. Peace.